Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I'm Salem Ghoweri. I'm lead front-end architect at Pegasystems, based here out of Cambridge. And I'm one of the core Pattern Lab contributors, Evan Lovely being another one of the guys. I work at Pegasystems. We're a CRM, BPM, and automation software company that power the Fortune 1000. We've got over 4,200 employees worldwide, servicing some of the largest companies. And my team, the digital team there, provide Drupal front-end development, back-end development, design, UX services for over 7 of our sites that we have, with many teams depending on the work that we do. I'm also really excited to say that I'm part of the design system team there, Bolt. And for those of you who've never heard of Bolt, we have a design system. It's Pattern Lab, Twig, and web component based, which is a lot of the story we have to talk about today. Bolt's unique. It's new. We only just launched it about a year ago, and so far we've actually had some really awesome praise. Like Evan saying, it's one of the best, most cutting-edge design systems out there. It's really flattering. Design systems are really hard, and frankly, there's not a lot of resources out there, especially design systems plus Drupal. This stuff's not easy. And I keep using this word design system, but I also want to make sure that everyone here is on the same page. So, what is a design system? A design system offers us a library of visual styles, components, and other things that we document and we release, both as code, tools, etc. That's things like your visual styles or your accessibility guidelines, your components, your documentation, not just the docs on how to use the thing, but should you use the thing. It's tools like Pattern Lab, which lets you build static sites, components. It lets you test and iterate very quickly without all the overhead that you might get with full-on CMS. Collectively, all of these things make up a design system, but there's also a lot more, and we'll go into some of that today. So what's the point? What am I going to get out of one of these design systems? Well, for us, we found that design systems have fundamentally changed how we do work on our team. They allow us to really build components at scale, maintain them, reduce the amount of rework and duplication that we have, and all of that means we have more resources to test, fix bugs, and get stuff shipped faster. Today we're going to be talking about our first design system, how it rose from nothing, seemingly, how it had its shortcomings, ultimately kind of failing, and how from that experience, really only from that experience, were we able to stand up the design system that I'm proud to say that we have today. In that journey, we realized a lot of things. We learned a lot of things. And we're going to be covering some of those. How you decouple your design system. How you're able to ship, how the heck do you actually, ship a single source of truth. And how we found that the whole headless movement the industry has been moving towards, how headless and web components have a lot of commonality between one another. In the beginning, we didn't have a design system. And things were pretty much all over the place. Like all over the place. Things weren't great. We had a lot of Drupal 7 sites. It took over 30 seconds to compile one CSS change using Compass. We didn't have any reusable components to speak of. We didn't have templates. There was a lot of duplicate, redundant work. And to top it all off, we had a heavily modified version of Bootstrap that made working in this environment tricky. So you want to update a button style. Well, which button style would you like to update? The problem we found ourselves in was there wasn't any single source of truth. There wasn't any go-to place for everything. It was all over the place. And, making something as seemingly small of a change as updating a button color, that could take days. So we rolled up our sleeves, and we took a crack at solving this problem. Our first design system at Pega, which I kind of named PegaKit, was a proto-design system. We added the first CSS architecture that our team's first CSS architecture. It's CSS, inverted triangle CSS. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of it. It's pretty great. It basically lets you break up your different pieces that make up your styling, your variables, your mix-ins, your base element styles, your components, utility classes. It gives you a framework to make sense of it all that scales great and gives you a lot of the structure you need as your team grows. We added our first build process. We incorporated SVG icons to start slowly weaning off the font icons. We incorporated lazy-loaded, responsive images, and being a huge performance nut myself, we also added async font loading so that our sites loaded as quickly as they could possibly. And I have to add, because it's in the talk and I'm a huge Pattern Lab nerd, we added Pattern Lab for Twig to our proto-design system here to start prototyping and building out all of the new designs marketing had dreamt up. And eventually, we were able to move all of that out of the Drupal site this all started in into its own separate repo, which Drupal then used Composer to pull back into it. At the time, that was pretty cutting edge. Unfortunately, we had some problems. At the time, the design system was one person. We had a lot of technical debt that, it was unfortunate, but it was just the nature of it. We had a lot of websites and website reincarnations that we had to start with as a starting point. And I'll get to more of this in a little bit. We committed the pre-compiled dist folder. So all of the CSS, the JavaScript, the templates, everything went into one place, whole kit and caboodle. And then one day someone asked, oh hey, how does that Pattern Lab thing you have going, how does that work in Drupal 8? Let me be right back. It was time to refactor. We were able to remove that problematic bootstrap issue. We added the best-of-class ideas at the time to our still in development design system. Things like adding in Twig namespaces for better Drupal support. We figured out how to get the attributes object that are pretty much the standard in every Twig template in Drupal. We figured out how to get Pattern Lab to speak that, so the templates we produced worked seamlessly everywhere. Having a bunch of new sites pop up in this time, we added a bunch of new components and really refined and iterated on the ones that we started with. By around this time last year, actually, when I presented the last design for Drupal, we had 3 separate brand new Drupal 8 sites, plus quite a number of new sections, Pega.com's D7 site, all running on this still in progress design system. It's pretty exciting. And it still flopped, which was unfortunate. It was still just me. We also had a lot of new technical debt. And this is kind of the double-edged sword of a lot of new websites, a lot of new fresh designs. You're adding a lot of new complexity that you have to either reconcile or kind of live with. Unfortunately, the way that we shipped things at the time was very, how do I say it? Was very rigid. You got everything that we had in our design system, and that was it. So if you wanted the kitchen sink, everything but the kitchen sink, and if you just want a fork, kind of out of luck. And this is mostly because of how we actually published and versioned our design system. Using branches on Git is not a sustainable model as your flourishing design system needs to grow. One of my favorite things about front-end development and working on the web in general is this idea of constant iteration. There's always some new technique, new tool, new technology, new idea. So we took that in mind when we realized last year we need to do a hard reboot. So rather than rewrite this whole design system from scratch, we took the best parts, kept them, brushed them off a little bit, and we directly addressed the parts that were causing the problems. And that's how we got the Bolt design system we have today. After all of the shortcomings were addressed from PegaKit, we rebranded as Bolt. We open sourced our code on GitHub, which if you guys are interested, you can check out the link up there. We cleaned up, we reorganized, we got our ducks in a row, and we started this new unexplored territory of building our components in one place and shipping them out as individual pieces. Trying to summarize everything that we've learned over the past 2 years is really hard. It's really intimidating, actually. There's a lot, and maybe in another format with a day-long session, we can get into some more details, but today I'm going to cover 3 of the largest things that we learned when growing up and scaling our design system. First being decoupling. And what I thought decoupling was has actually changed quite a bit over the years. Right now, my definition of it is it's separate, but still close by. Essentially, the way that we restructured our new design system is everything that we have, that we ship, lives in one single place. Your components, your shared visual styles, your typography, your build tools, all of the things that you want to version and distribute downstream, those all live in one single place, a monorepo. Then, rather than stopping there, we actually decided to take it one step further and realized, well, if Drupal is trying to pull in this button component, why shouldn't Pattern Lab pull that button component in the exact same way? Or our static site, or our Drupal Lab site. So that's what we did. We took all of these different example applications, websites, and we wired everything that we have in the design system code base to pull our components in the same way that others outside of the design system would consume things, which adds the added benefit of actually being something that other people can reference. This is the ecosystem that we're trying to tackle right now. Our team is. And for you guys, your own situation and the scope of the world may be quite different. But for us, we realized that we have a lot of different stakeholders, different websites, some new, some old. We have Drupal-specific sites, static site needs. We need to get this design system wired up to our applications, other CMSs like SharePoint. How the heck do you build a design system that can scale and support and facilitate so many stakeholders? Well, one thing we realized is the old way, the way that I inherently am used to doing things or organizing things, it doesn't scale anymore as much as I would like it to. And specifically, where does your CSS live? Where does your JavaScript live? You know, styles folder, scripts folder, templates folder. Organizing our code that way was very difficult when it came time to delete something and retire code. It made making our system as modular and as you need it, piecemeal, made it very difficult to scale. It also meant that people downstream were stuck with consuming the whole thing, even if they just wanted a couple components to start out with. Also, as the design system had more and more adopters, we had significant concerns that we'd have a repeat of last time. Finally, with front-end development really shifting towards JavaScript, not necessarily only, but as a way to complement what front-end actually does, we need a way to actually have our components define their own dependencies. I'm a button component and I require this analytics library for NPM. We need a way to codify what each piece needs so it can live on its own when it's published, but live together when it's not. And that's how we realized we needed to reorganize everything for maximum reusability. This is our drop-down component as an example. Reorganize for reusability, but also make it Drupal friendly. Drupal friendly as a first-class citizen. So let me give you a really quick run through on what that actually kind of looks like. So you can ignore this first one. It's just a little Twig partial. Our Twig component for the dropdown pulls that in. We have dropdown.js. This is where all of the brains of our dropdown component actually live. And as we'll be talking about in a couple of minutes, where the web component magic happens. We have a schema. And up to this point, I'd thought that schemas were only JSON, but apparently they work really great with YAML as well. So the schemas were one of those game-changing things that allows us to define what the component is and does and expects, and have that information propagate throughout the entire system that we're putting together. We have our Sass, so drop-down component-specific styles make it nice and encapsulated. And even though we're talking about shipping individual pieces here, keep in mind that this is still pulling in shared styles that every other component in the design system, CSS and JS, has access to. So we still have a shared visual vocabulary to keep things consistent. We have our dropdown.twig file, so standard Drupal Twig embeds includes all of those things apply here, all the same. This is a bit of an odd one. We have index.js. This is weird, but we put it in there for a reason. So the dropdown.js file, that's just our component by itself. There's no cross-browser support, there's no opinions in that. It's just the pure logic. We also include, by default, a separate JS module that is actually used by default unless you know what you're doing, that preloads all of the polyfills that you need in order to get the cross-browser support that we need to be supporting. What this means is it just works unless you, for some reason, just want to pull in the logic, in which case it still just works. We have a package.json file, so this is how we have our npm installed components. It's how we version our components. It's how we allow our components to show up on GitHub and npm. And then we have a markdown file, readme. And as we'll be showing you guys in the docs in a minute, we're using this really to make it easy to see what the heck's going on npm and GitHub. So just a quick little demo of our current drop-down component. What this is showing you guys is we have a Twig include. Twig include is giving you all the HTML that you need in order to render this thing. It's fully accessible, it works with your keyboard, works with your mouse. Style, we turn on the JavaScript, and then that initial Twig template that you get from the server, which could work totally by itself without JavaScript, it then gets enhanced, progressively enhanced, to be a full-on web component. So we load up our icon, we add additional accessibility support with ARIA tags. We really take this Twig, the superpowered Twig component, JS kicks in, and we give it even more superpowers. This is the gold standard that we're shooting for with our design system. We also learned that Pattern Lab and your design system, while they're friends, and while Pattern Lab is a valuable tool that we continue to use to this day, they're still fundamentally different. And if we aren't careful, certain anti-patterns can pop up that really hurt Drupal adoption downstream. For example, Pattern Lab has this idea of a sidecar file, button tilde large.json. What this does is it tells Pattern Lab, oh hey, I see a tilde in your file name. Go look for my button.twig file and pass the data in this JSON file into it. It's fantastic for doing quick development, but if you're actually codifying each variation of your button for other people in the ecosystem to consume, that's very confusing. So we don't use it. It's there, it could be used, but in order to promote adoption, we avoid using them. We also started to move away very quickly, actually, even in PegaKit's era, of using the shorthand syntax their Twig templates allow. And frankly, it's great, it's simple, it's less things to type, but Drupal doesn't know how to use this, and Drupal's not going to be knowing how to use this. All of the standard go-to ways you would wire up a design system or pattern lab instance, they don't apply when you're dealing with this sort of pattern labism. Like I mentioned with the README file, it's important for us to make sure our documentation is available everywhere and is easy to get to. You don't have to fish around for it. Having these markdown files, button.md, which again compiles fine in Pattern Lab, you don't get the docs in all the places you'd actually go to learn what the thing is, should I use it, do I need it, how do I install it. And finally, just one more mention about the Twig namespaces. We still use them quite extensively, but we also realize that hard coding our Twig namespaces, both in the Pattern Lab side and on the Drupal side, as soon as those Twig namespaces are hard coded, this very specific rigid path, it makes updating and changing and reorganizing your code base over time close to near impossible. So we use them, but we make sure that we have a process in place that automatically keeps that path up to date. Here's a quick little example of one of the neat features we added with bolt1.x. So in Pattern Lab, just viewing the button component, very top of the page, we have our documentation on the button. And then there's an edit on GitHub link, which means that our designers, our developers, front end and back end, our UX designers, anyone on the team can see the docs, read them right with the source of truth, but also have the ability to go and edit and submit a pull request right then and there, significantly reducing the barrier to entry. You don't need to run the code on your local machine to be able to contribute to the design system. We also incorporated a static site generator, and I come from a place, from a time where Jekyll was the new hotness when it came out, and it's still really popular. Unfortunately, static site generators like Jekyll don't scale with your design system. You can't build a doc site powered by your design system for your design system if the templating language that's supported is kind of like Twig, but not really. So we took a crack and ended up writing our own static site generator that our new design system site is powered by. I mentioned before about shipping a single source of truth. And again, back in the PegaKit days, this was something that wasn't quite as obvious then as it is now, just how important this is. What the heck does that actually mean, though? Like, it's great on paper, but how do I create a single source of truth and then distribute that across my organization or my team? One way we do that is with schemas. And I thought schemas were the JSON only thing, and then learned about the YAML version, which was really awesome. So schemas are the codified rules each component has baked into it. Things like what data it supports, what are the different fields called, what's allowed, what's not allowed, what's required, what's optional. Having a schema per component means there's a contractual codified rule everybody has to be meeting. It also means we can do really cool things like this. This is inside a Pattern Lab using vanilla Twig. We have a schema-powered documentation table. It's always up to date. It stays in sync with the version of the design system that you're on. So as we roll out new features, no one needs to remember to go and update the docs page. It's already up to date for you. We also started to wire up our demos in Pattern Lab with this single source of truth. So for our button example here, if we added a new button color option, we add it to our YAML file in one spot. For every button style that exists, go show all the different button state variations. This gives us a new model on how we do development here, where there's one file, one codified source of truth, and all the things that reflect that are updated automatically. We've also been incorporating this idea into how we deal with data in general. And we actually started dealing with this with our earlier design system, albeit very lightly. We've taken that to a whole new level with Bolt. So what we've done with Bolt is introduce this idea of a single source of truth for data. Each component, each piece, be it your colors, your typography, maybe your spacing scale, Everything that needs data or has data shares it into one single place. For us, it's JSON. We consolidate that and then make sure that we have tools available so every other piece of your system, every other piece of your code base stays up to date, stays in sync. So for example, with our style guide that we have in Pattern Lab, this is Twig. The Twig is just getting access to the global data that any other Twig template has available. So for this, take all the colors that we have. If we update them in our SAS file, SAS creates some new JSON data. Your style guide is already up to date. We also realized that we needed a new strategy on how we publish our components out in the wild. And we took a look, we did some homework and see what was out there. And we came across this really awesome tool called Lerna. And Lerna's not new. It's been around for a few years now, but we'd never really seen it used the way that we needed it to, because Lerna is a JavaScript only. Well, Lerna doesn't care what technology you use, but a lot of the biggest players that have already been using Lerna, things like Babel or React, those are all JavaScript-heavy applications. So we weren't really sure if this model of distributing stuff on NPM, how that actually fits in a world of PHP dependencies and Composer and Drupal. It turns out it works extremely well. So now you can go on NPM and see every bulk component that we have published, what versions are available, new and old. And as a Drupal consumer, you can pick and choose just the pieces that you need to build out your solution or your application. Finally, let's talk about web components, and specifically Headless, Drupal, this whole movement I've been seeing in the industry the last couple years, especially at DrupalCon Nashville this past year. What's going on with Headless Drupal? Like, is that where we should be going as a design system team? Can we go headless? Should we go headless? And the answer is, it depends. There's a lot of things someone should consider when pondering if they should go headless. Is the team large enough? Do you need the ability to use Twig templates? Are you using any community-contributed modules and plugins that depend on Twig? Maybe you have different use cases and needs. Maybe you need to do single-page applications or very experiential apps that should be headless, needs to be headless. For us, we realized that our ecosystem, as broad and diverse and growing as it was still, for the most part, mostly Drupal, maybe some static sites and some other new territory we're trying to get into, like our Pega apps. But it's still primarily Drupal specific, and we wanted to make sure that whole JavaScript first movement the industry's been heading towards, we wanted to see if we could get some of those benefits of encapsulated components and real-time updates. You update the data, the component re-renders. We wanted that, but we wanted it in a way that could be rolled out incrementally and supported and worked with the Drupal ecosystem. And that's how we landed on web components. If you're new to the idea of web components, you're not alone. I only just learned about them a few years ago. They're actually, basically, they're a new way that browsers have opened up APIs to allow you to build components, native-like components, that work on the web. It's not a framework. It's not a library. I mean, you can use them. But it's really just, it's like JavaScript. It's a fundamental low-level way to register your component, have it work with the browser, have it do its whole lifecycle events, and give you all the benefits of a full-on component, like a button, without having to go all in with a full headless Drupal or React-based app. Same encapsulation, it's just a component, here's my data, you can pass into it. A lot of those same benefits that we were wanting, but in a way that is browser supported, officially sanctioned, and can scale as our needs and as our use increases. Before I forget, web components is pretty much an umbrella term. It's actually 4 technologies. It's the custom element spec, which is my HTML snippet, my HTML tag that's unique to my component that's bound to. It's the shadow DOM, which is how components like these can be encapsulated to add CSS and HTML inside of it. If any of you guys have looked at a video on the web ever on HTML5 video player, if you've ever wondered, well, where do all the button controls and the little slider, or maybe the little volume pop-up, where did all those come from? This is where those come from. It's just the browser vendors are now opening it up for everybody. To round them off, HTML templates. So how does your component stamp out its own markup quickly? And then ES modules, which is not specific to web components, but web components tie into it. And that's really how you can let a component import in other components, nest components, compose other components, and get a lot of reuse out of this stuff. Finally, just to make sure we're on the same page, browser support for this stuff has actually been getting pretty darn good. As of right now, I know Chrome and Safari fully support all of these technologies. Firefox already supports custom elements, and unless I'm mistaken, they're shipping Shadow DOM support, I think, next month. It's already behind a flag for their nightlies. And, you know, we're in a world where, with corporate, where IE11 is still a thing. Polyfills actually work pretty darn good. Button components, video components, icon components, you name it, you can get them to work in IE11 and not have to wait on and on for the future to eventually come. Web components give you the ability to ship once, build once, ship multiple times, ship everywhere that works for all of your consumers. They also give you some really pretty freaking awesome superpowers. So this is an example of using CSS variables along with our in-production button component. The way that we handle styling here, theming here, and I mean the color palette theming, not the I'm going to build my website theming. The way that this works is if you're in a section of the site that has a dark theme, we're going to use our yellows for our button color palette. And if you're on a lighter theme, a white or a light gray, it'll actually use our cooler indigo colors instead. There's no specific CSS that says, oh, this class name in this section. It's registering which kinds of color palettes that section of the site needs, and it wires up to that. Finally, I should mention, with JavaScript frameworks and going totally headless, there's this great site called Custom Elements Everywhere. It goes through some of the most popular JavaScript frameworks out there. Vue.js, Angular, React, Preact. Believe it or not, almost all of the big players out there of JavaScript frameworks fully support 100% web components. It's actually only React that has been dragging their feet, and you can still use web components in React and other applications that are not React. You might not get every single feature. You might need to work a little bit to wire it up, but it still works. So we've covered quite a lot of information in a really short amount of time. Was all this stuff worth it? Design systems aren't magic, and they're a ton of work, but they're totally worth it. We just launched a couple weeks ago community.pega.com. It's probably the most highly trafficked site that we have. And this is all using Bolt out of the gate, day one. It's almost entirely powered by our design system. The buttons, the headlines, the bands, the video player there, that's all Bolt. Most of those are web components too. The manager on our team said, there's no way we would have been able to hit the launch date if we weren't using Bolt. What normally would take us days, what we were able to implement everything in days when it would have taken us weeks normally. This is amazing. This is actually happening with the design system. We're definitely growing as a team. Another great example of some outcomes we've seen happen a couple months ago with some contractors we were working with. We were trying to build out a new static site for our annual conference that we have in Las Vegas. And two Drupal engineers were cracking away at this for over a week, trying to take these comps that they had been given and figure out how to get Drupal fully wired up to it. They worked on this for about a week, 2 of them, full time, and in less than a day, it was actually about 4 hours, and then we went in and added some real content. One of the guys on our team, Mike Mai, he was able to build the fully working prototype of this thing in literally a day. And the Drupal engineers were, oh, well, whatever. We have the working version here. I think 2 hours later, after we showed them that, they called us back and said, hey, can we use that? That's what's live on the website right now. They actually took the code directly from our static prototype in Pattern Lab. That's what's on the website. Decoupling your design system from Drupal and from Pattern Lab, while not always easy, fundamentally helps you organize, maintain, and scale up your design system. And new tools like Lorna help you publish your design system as pieces to make adoption easier, incremental, and updates a breeze. Schemas in JSON are a really powerful way to get your system always up to date, to share data, keep things wired up and evolving. It has fundamentally changed how we do development, and I couldn't encourage you guys enough to look into that approach more. Finally, Headless is great if you need it. And if you don't, take a look at web components. They're a new technology, kind of, 5 years in the making, but they're profoundly the same. Actually, if I go back 2 slides, that video player there used to be a React component, like legit React component. And I took a look at it, took a crack at it, and I ported it over to be a full-on web component. Maybe a couple hours to get something up and running, and we've been iterating on it since. That's all I got. Of course, unless you have any questions or want to see a demo.
Demo.
Let me just mirror my screen. Okay, so GitHub page, Pattern Lab page, components page. Pega.com homepage. So let's take a look at one of these buttons here. There's a lot of props that we have on this thing, but believe it or not, most of them are not even required. So I'm going to do a bolt button. I'm not even going to say what kind of style I want. I'm just going to say bolt button, hello D for D. And there we go. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention. Semantically, it starts out as being a button because if you don't have a URL, why on earth would you? This is not like this is considered to be best practice. Let's just put a URL on there. .org, right? So I just added a URL parameter to this. Now it's updated it to actually be an A tag, which if it was an actual, I think it's .com, isn't it? D for D Drupal, I forgot it. It would work all the same. It's in an iframe in Pattern Lab. Another great example is just something as simple as what color do you want? So color primary, I say color secondary, it's up to date. or if the icon inside of it, I have a little chevron right here. So we have icon components as web components now, video player. We've been building up our toolkit of these things for about a year now. And every new thing we've been rolling out, like the drop-down component, keeps kind of increasing our toolkit and giving us more insights on how the heck do we actually build these out at scale, make them more flexible, make them more resilient, make them easier to actually boot up and reuse. Then the other great thing about this is if I go from one web property that we have to another, the buttons that we have here are the exact same buttons that we have here. And whenever we come up with new updates, we make improvements, we make things more accessible and more performant, we publish them out in one central place with the design system team. And every place that's consuming them has full control on whether or not they want to pull those updates in. And when they do, it's as simple as npm update, and then what's the component name? Or npm update, you could update everything. It's still entirely in the control of the consumers what version they want to use, when they want to update, when they want to publish. We're not forcing anyone to consume something until they're ready. But the great thing is, if we update something centrally, every place wired up to that single source of truth stays up to date. I could keep going, but...
So before this, everything I've seen integrating Drupal with Pattern Lab has Pattern Lab in a subdirectory of the theme directory, which has always bothered me. So
same here.
The idea of decoupling your design system from Drupal and from Pattern Lab seems like the best idea I've heard today.
Thank you. We're still BFFs with Pattern Lab, but Pattern Lab is now at the same level playing field as Drupal or any other application for that matter.
So which of those two is harder, decoupling it from Drupal or decoupling it from Pattern Lab?
Well, here's the thing about our approach to Pattern Lab in the past year, year plus. Myself and Evan, actually. Pattern Lab is a tool, like Drupal is a tool, albeit a little bit more complicated. So getting Pattern Lab to use Twig should be the same way that we get Drupal to use Twig. So whenever we spin up our Drupal site or our Pattern Lab site locally, of course, live demo, it'll bork on me, but the way that Pattern Lab would pull in a component with the Twig namespaces, with what data we would expect, so like the attributes object support, we want to make sure that Pattern Lab and Drupal are completely, they're interchangeable. So if it works in one place, it should work on the other one, albeit how the data gets to the point of rendering it, I understand is fundamentally different. But if you're just dealing with a single component, paragraph types are a great example, it's really all the same. So does that kind of answer your question, as conceptual at least?
I was really thinking of the technical difficulty of what changes do you have to make to Drupal so that it works.
Sure. The node modules, the biggest change was teaching both systems how to use your templates that are directly, man, I had the port covered. Always have a backup. Button component stocks, button components variations, theming, the different sizes. Don't know what's going up with the control there, but it's a regular Pattern Lab instance under the hood, but we've been rolling out some plugins that are available, on GitHub to teach Pattern Lab how to use recursive namespaces and to really tell Pattern Lab, this is where my data lives, or this is where my Twig templates live. And those are the same tools that we've published for Drupal to teach it the exact same way. So, packages folder, here's our source of truth. Here's all the different pieces that we have published and version of the design system. And then we have an apps folder. So we have our static docs site, we have our Drupal lab instance, Pattern Lab itself, and a little standalone site we've been testing out some stuff with. So, I mean, I could go on, but basically we list off what components you want to teach your environment about. And then we have a node-based build tool that will spit out some JSON data that Drupal and Pattern Lab look at to actually see where your content build data. So Twig namespaces. So this will go through every single component that's in our manifest, and it'll map out, oh, here's the component's name with the path that needs to be wired out. So basically Drupal knows exactly where your components are. You update your component, start to build it, it'll update the path so things don't break. Things always stay up to date. So I would actually just say that they're both the exact same first-class citizen. Any environment that can use Twig can take full advantage of this approach. Any more questions? Oh, sorry.
Hi. I was questioning about when it comes to global styles or just global changes. Knowing that you have an application that's pretty been built for a bit of a long time to when that is migrating to a new format to JSON, JS versus actually CSS on fallback.
That's a great question. Sorry.
Like best practices to go about doing that. That you have went through that bootstrap kind of issue.
Oh, yeah. So it's crazy, but the CSS architecture that we put in place 2 years ago, still the same one that we're using today. It's actually been one of those things that have been more and more and more battle tested. We basically, the change that we made was, if at the component level, so if I look at components and say our button-specific styles in our Sass, this is dealing with, so we have component-specific prefix, so versus like an object for like the grid system, whatever. So we know, one, the class is specific to a component. We added bolt as a namespace, so going from the early version of the design system to our current one, we realized, well, we still have components out there that are not going to be updated to this. We want to make sure adoption is as painless as possible, so we added a prefix to make sure there is that little bit of encapsulation to make things not be as punchy. But the component itself, so it's namespace, we're using BEM, we use flattened selectors as much as possible. Every component that we have uses a single core shared dependency. What that basically does is it lets us take the first two levels of our CSS architecture. Things like, we have our vendor, like breakpoint Sass, things like our color palette, that I showed you guys. So all of this data is essentially, this is just variables, or for tools, the mixins that are actually color palette. This is just referencing the data that we have. So the way we've been building this whole system up is you build tools, be it in Sass or JavaScript or Twig, everything that can reach in and get data or put data back. So for these first two levels, we don't write any CSS out to the file system. It's purely, variables, mixins, functions. Everybody can pull this in universally, so if we update our color palette, everything could update to that, And because it's still a mono repo, every component that we currently are authoring and maintaining is getting, it would get compiled and we'd actually see if there'd be any breaking changes. We can address those at the moment. And then when we do our publish, all the things that needed to get updated, needed to get iterated on, are going to have those updates in as soon as we hit the publish button. So this stuff's hard, but it's a lot of little baby steps. That's why the whole backstory about how we got here is so important, because I think the best ideas that we figured out, they're still alive and well. We're just putting a little bit of a different wrapper around it in order to make it easier to ship. Any more questions? Oh, yeah.
Super minor one, but are all of the components like versioned so that like whenever you have breaking changes, that's not a concern?
It's a great question. So, Pixel Snap has an update. we actually made a little bit of a pivot in our versioning strategy, going from Bolt 0.x, which was the big migration from PegaKit, the last best version we came up with, to legit Bolt. We originally thought every component should be versioned, and every standalone piece of the system should be versioned. So what that meant was our breakpoint settings was versioned, our color palette was versioned, our font sizes were versioned, every little piece was versioned, and it worked. But that also meant we went from 0 packages to having over 150, which is way too many for anyone to try to wrap their head around. So we took a step back, and with Bolt 1.x, which is live, we simplified that versioning. So each component is independently versioned, and then big chunks of the code base that everybody is pulling in, so something like Bolt Core or our build tools, those things are standalone and versioned separately. We also changed the way that Lerna, the tool that we use to publish these things out in the wild, we changed the way that the versioning model was configured. Before, you could have button at version 2.3 and your icons at 1.0. Now we switched it to be a little bit more simpler, again, to make it easier to consume, easier to wrap your head around. So whenever you publish anything, any updates that need to go out, and the tool helps with this, it'll say, oh, these things have changed since, and all of those things are going to get published and incremented to the same version. So as soon as there's a big breaking change, we'd probably have to update a lot of things in the system anyways. All of those things would then be bumped up to 2.0 or 3.0, which makes the semantic versioning means we're keeping up with it. We rolled out Bolt 1.x a couple months ago, and my team can speak on their behalf, but it was actually, I think, pretty painless, all things considered, especially for a breaking change. We're still learning, even at this point. We realize too far, just right at this point.
Thank you. Say something. So, you mentioned paragraphs earlier, and I think for this audience it might be interesting to talk a little bit about how we have, not 100%, but we have really good parity between paragraphs in Drupal and components in Bolt, or at least recipes in Bolt.
I think a big part of that has to do with the simplification of our folder structure. So the components that we have that are actually versioned, there's no demos in here, there's no, I'm noodling on some new design concept. It is the pure, simplified thing that everyone's going to be pointing at, Drupal included, paragraph types included. What we do is we actually have in Pattern Lab, so source, patterns, if I go to our button component, something like, say, sizes. This is using the schema that I was mentioning, so this is directly referencing our unified data model. Looks through every single size that's there. These are, by the way, also great examples and demos for Drupal developers, even though it's in Pattern Lab, because Drupal would be able to pull in, if it's an NPM installed, Drupal would be able to use verbatim the same approach here as it would in your CMS environment. So if it's an opinionated paragraph type, you might be pre-configuring it to certain options that are available in the component. And if it's a kitchen sink kind of paragraph type, you'd just be referencing the main component itself.
to use a simple example, the one that you were talking about a lot, button, like
Mm-hmm.
in the administration interface on the site admins can compose a page and basically put a button wherever they want, and that button is equal function.
And that button equates directly to what options are in the single source of truth.
Right.
Yeah. Any more questions? All right. Well, thank you very much, guys, for coming. Really appreciate it. I'll be posting the slides after, probably at the end of the day, and hit me up on Twitter if you have any questions.